The city at night was a beast of its own kind. Lights blinked like restless eyes, sirens wailed in the distance, and the hum of endless traffic carried through the streets like a pulse. To most, it was a place of opportunity and life. But to one man, high above in a glass-walled office overlooking the skyline, the city felt like a cage. He sat at his desk, the CEO of one of the largest corporations in the state, a man admired by thousands and feared by even more. His suit was immaculate, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, his reputation flawless. On paper, he was the embodiment of success. Yet in that moment, staring at the untouched whiskey on his desk, he felt something he had not felt in decades: helplessness. The source of this helplessness lay in a single framed photograph. The photo wasn't a corporate award, not a certificate of achievement, but a picture of his wife. She was young, glowing with the kind of happiness that radiated from within. Her smile was pure, hopeful, unshakable. In the photo, her hand rested lovingly on her swollen belly. She was pregnant, a fact she carried with joy. For her, it was a new beginning. For him, it was the end of everything he had built. He had always lived by control. Control was his oxygen, his driving force. He controlled numbers, employees, markets, and the direction of his empire. When there was risk, he calculated it. When there was a problem, he crushed it. That was how he had risen from a boy in a poor neighborhood with nothing but a sharp mind, to a man who could bend politicians with a phone call. His identity wasn't tied to family, to love, or to companionship. His identity was tied to the empire he had created brick by brick, decision by decision, ruthless cut by ruthless cut. Now, the idea of a child threatened to shatter that. A child meant weakness. A child meant compromise. A child meant that his wife, who had once been his elegant ornament and occasional partner in public appearances, would no longer be content with the silent arrangement of their marriage. She would want him home. She would want him present. She would want him to be a father, and the very word twisted inside him like poison. He had no interest in sleepless nights, no patience for laughter in hallways or toys scattered across their marble floors. He had spent his entire life making sure he never had to live like ordinary people, and now she was dragging him into it. At first, he tried to ignore the thoughts. He smiled when she smiled, held her hand when she asked, pretended to be the loving husband when the world was watching. At the doctor's office, he even nodded along when the ultrasound showed the flickering heartbeat of the baby. But deep inside, every beat of that tiny heart felt like the ticking of a clock counting down to his own ruin. Each week that passed, as her body changed, his resentment grew heavier. It began to fill his nights. He would stand at the window of their penthouse, looking down at the city lights, imagining what his empire would look like in 10 years, in 20. He saw himself expanding, dominating, leaving a legacy of power. And then he would picture the child, crying, demanding, consuming his wife's energy, weakening her, distracting him. It wasn't the image of a future he wanted. And then came the night he accepted the truth: he could not allow this to happen. The thought shocked him at first. It felt like stepping off the edge of a building, like something only a monster could consider. But as he rolled it over in his mind, it began to make sense. He had spent years making brutal decisions that others couldn't. He had betrayed partners, dismantled competitors, driven men to ruin, all for the sake of survival and growth. Why should this decision be any different? He told himself this wasn't about cruelty. It was about necessity. That was when a name surfaced from the depths of his memory. Years ago, at a smoky dinner party filled with men who lived in the shadows of society, someone had whispered about a man known only as Accident. The stories painted him as more legend than human. They said he was the one you called when you wanted someone gone but didn't want blood on your hands. He specialized in tragedy. His victims didn't just die, they died in ways that made people shake their heads and mutter about fate. Car crashes, house fires, slips down staircases. Nothing that could be traced. Nothing that looked like murder. The CEO had tucked the name away, never expecting to use it. But that night, as his wife slept peacefully in their bedroom, her hands folded protectively over the life inside her, he crept into his office, unlocked a hidden file in his phone, and stared at the number he had saved under a false contact. His fingers hovered over the keypad, his breath shallow. When he finally pressed call, he felt as though he had signed something with blood. The line clicked after 3 rings. "Who is this?" The voice was low, calm, and chillingly steady. I need you, the CEO said softly. There was a pause. Then, name. They call you Accident. The line went quiet. Then the voice said, I'm listening. That was how it began. They arranged to meet the following night. The location was a warehouse far outside the city, a place where the world's rules didn't apply. The CEO drove out in his black car, the city lights fading behind him, replaced by the silence of empty highways and fog curling over cracked roads. He carried with him a silver briefcase packed with money. Each stack of bills represented his freedom. Each note was a nail in the coffin of the woman who thought she was building a family with him. The warehouse loomed in the mist, its walls rusted, its windows shattered. Inside, shadows stretched across the floor. Accident was already waiting. He emerged from the darkness slowly, a tall man in a leather jacket, jeans, and heavy boots. His hood was pulled up, his face half hidden, his presence radiating something colder than intimidation. It wasn't menace, it was emptiness. The CEO set the briefcase on a crate. His throat was dry, his pulse racing, but his face remained expressionless. You know the rules? Accident asked. I know you're the best, the CEO replied. I know you don't make mistakes. Target. The CEO hesitated, just for a moment. Then the words fell like stones. My wife. She's pregnant. She can't have the child. She can't be here anymore. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke him. Even the distant hum of the highway seemed to vanish. Accident tilted his head slightly, studying him. You're sure? Absolutely, the CEO said firmly. I'll pay double, triple, if you want. It has to look like an accident. No suspicion. No trace back to me. Accident crouched, opened the briefcase, and flicked through the bills with a gloved hand. He closed it again with a soft click. Then he nodded once, as if to seal the deal. The CEO felt a rush of relief so powerful it nearly knocked him back. It was done. The weight that had been suffocating him for months lifted from his chest. Soon, his wife would be gone, and with her the child he never wanted. His empire would be safe. His life would return to the way it was meant to be, uncompromised, controlled, perfect. But what he did not, and could not, know was that the man he had just hired was no ordinary hitman. Accident was not a killer. He was a creation, a phantom crafted by the FBI to lure men like this into revealing the blackness of their souls. For years, Accident had been whispered about in the underworld, but behind the myth stood a carefully trained informant. Every meeting, every transaction, every chilling request had been captured, documented, and handed to federal agents. That night, the CEO had signed his own confession. Every word he spoke was recorded. Every desperate detail about making it look like an accident was preserved as evidence. The briefcase of money, the very thing he thought would buy his freedom, was now a weapon aimed directly at him. He didn't know that, of course. Driving home through the fog, he felt lighter than he had in months. When he slipped into bed beside his sleeping wife, he even smiled faintly. She stirred, turned toward him, her hand instinctively resting on her stomach. He looked at her, not with love, but with a cold, triumphant calculation. In his mind, she was already gone. The chains had been broken. For the first time in a long time, he slept peacefully. But across the city, in a room filled with monitors and agents wearing headsets, his voice echoed again and again through the speakers. Men and women in dark suits leaned over transcripts, marking every line. The trap had been sprung, and the clock was ticking. The empire he thought he had saved was already collapsing around him. The morning after the meeting in the warehouse dawned bright and calm, as if the world itself had decided to wash away the darkness of the night before. Birds sang outside the mansion windows, sunlight spilled through the curtains, and his wife hummed softly in the kitchen while preparing breakfast. To anyone else, it was a perfect domestic scene. To the CEO, it felt like a countdown. He watched her from across the room, her back turned as she carefully sliced fruit, her movements gentle, protective of the life growing inside her. Every small sound, the scrape of the knife, the clink of dishes, seemed amplified. He knew, in his mind, that soon this would all be gone. She turned, smiling at him with that same radiant warmth that had once charmed him, that now disgusted him. You're up early, she said softly, sliding a plate toward him. Yes, he replied curtly, forcing a thin smile. His tone was calm, his posture relaxed, but inside he was already rehearsing the lie he would tell when the accident happened. Perhaps he would appear heartbroken in public, holding her photograph for reporters, shaking his head at the cruelty of fate. Perhaps he would play the grieving widower, his pain turned into sympathy, his reputation polished by tragedy. The irony made his stomach twist with bitter amusement. But while he savored his private sense of control, the reality outside his home was far different. In a nondescript building downtown, a team of FBI agents sat clustered around screens, listening to the recordings of his meeting with Accident. They had everything they needed: clear audio of his voice ordering the death of his pregnant wife, video footage from hidden cameras, physical evidence in the form of the briefcase of money. The case was ironclad. Still, they were cautious. A man of his stature wasn't someone you arrested recklessly. His power, his resources, his connections, they all meant the operation had to be timed perfectly. For days, the FBI followed him. They tracked his calls, his movements, every detail of his schedule. Accident, the informant, fed them continuous updates. The CEO, blinded by arrogance, never suspected a thing. He carried himself with the same air of superiority, attending meetings, signing contracts, appearing in glossy magazines as the face of success. To the outside world, he was untouchable. To the agents building their case, he was already a prisoner, they just hadn't closed the door on his cell yet. At home, his wife began to notice small changes. He was oddly relaxed, almost cheerful at times. She mistook it for him finally embracing fatherhood, finally letting himself be happy. She confided in a friend over the phone that she thought things were improving, that maybe the baby had brought them closer. She didn't know that his smiles were born from anticipation, not love. He believed the plan was already set in motion, that Accident was preparing to remove her from the world. But the trap was tightening. One evening, Accident contacted him again, arranging what would appear to be the final confirmation. The CEO drove out once more, this time more confident, his steps lighter. They met in the shadows of another secluded spot, the CEO eager to hear that the end was near. "She'll be gone soon," Accident said in his steady, unreadable voice. The CEO nodded, satisfaction spreading across his face. "Good. Make it quick. Clean. I don't want questions." Accident tilted his head slightly, his expression hidden beneath the hood. "You'll have what you want." What the CEO didn't realize was that those words were not a promise of murder, but the final piece of evidence needed to seal his fate. The night chosen for the operation was cool and still. His wife sat in the living room, her feet propped up, reading a book aloud to the unborn child. She laughed softly at her own silliness, placing a hand on her stomach as if the baby could hear and understand. Upstairs, the CEO prepared himself mentally, waiting for a call that would never come. Instead, the call went to the FBI tactical team. In unmarked vans, black SUVs, and silent convoys, agents surrounded the mansion. They moved with precision, weapons ready, communication crisp. The moment was planned down to the second. They would take him alive, catch him in the house where his betrayal lived, and ensure his wife's safety. The first knock on the door came sharp and loud. His wife looked up, startled. Before she could move, the door burst open, and armed agents poured inside, shouting commands. She screamed, clutching her stomach, confusion flooding her face. She thought they were intruders, that danger had finally come, but within moments one of the agents approached gently, telling her to stay calm, that she was safe, that they were here to protect her. Upstairs, the CEO froze. He heard the shouts, the heavy footsteps, the unmistakable sound of authority moving through his home. Panic struck him like ice water. This wasn't possible. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He rushed to the staircase, only to be met with the blinding beam of flashlights and the deafening command of a dozen voices. "FBI. Hands where we can see them. Get on the ground now." For the first time in years, fear broke through his carefully constructed mask. He raised his hands, trying to speak, but the words tumbled out in fragments. This is a mistake, I don't." They moved fast, tackling him to the ground, twisting his arms behind his back, snapping cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. His face pressed into the polished floor, and he felt the full weight of reality crush him. This wasn't a negotiation, this wasn't a hostile takeover he could spin in his favor. This was the end. His wife, still trembling, watched in horror as the man she had loved was dragged down the stairs by armed agents. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she tried to make sense of it. "What's happening?" Why are you taking him? What did he do? One of the agents hesitated, then answered softly, "Ma'am, he hired a man to have you killed. He wanted it to look like an accident." The words struck her harder than any blow. She stumbled back, clutching her stomach, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, no, that's impossible. You're lying, he wouldn't." Her voice cracked, breaking into sobs. But the truth was undeniable. She had seen the look on his face as they took him away. She had seen the absence of surprise, the collapse of a man who knew he had been caught. The CEO was shoved into the back of a black SUV, the door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a final verdict. His mind raced with desperate thoughts, lawyers, bribes, escape plans, but deep down he knew none of it mattered. The recordings were clear. The money was real. The informant he thought was his savior had been his executioner. He had been outplayed, trapped, undone not by enemies in the boardroom but by his own arrogance and lack of humanity. The media frenzy erupted within hours. News outlets reported that a powerful CEO had been arrested for plotting the murder of his pregnant wife. His photo, once a symbol of corporate success, now appeared beside headlines filled with words like betrayal, conspiracy, and murder for hire. Investors pulled out of his company, stock prices plummeted, partners severed ties. The empire he had worked his whole life to build collapsed faster than he could have imagined. In the days that followed, his wife struggled with the weight of the revelation. Every memory of their marriage was poisoned now, every smile tainted with suspicion. She replayed conversations in her mind, moments when she thought he was cold or distracted, and realized the truth, that while she dreamed of their child's future, he dreamed of eliminating them both. Her grief was layered: grief for the husband she thought she had, grief for the family she almost lost, grief for the world she now had to face alone. In prison, the CEO sat in a concrete cell, stripped of his suit, his power, his control. He stared at the blank walls, replaying the moment he met accident in the warehouse, realizing too late that he had walked willingly into a trap. The man who once dictated the fate of hundreds now had no power over his own. Every night, he lay awake hearing the echo of the FBI's words, the click of handcuffs, the sob of his wife. His empire was gone. His reputation was gone. All that remained was a legacy of greed, betrayal, and failure. And in the silence of that cell, he finally understood the truth he had ignored for so long. The child he had feared was not a threat to his empire. He was the threat. His own heartless decisions had destroyed everything. The baby would be born into a world without him, raised not by a father but by the memory of a man who chose ambition over family and lost everything in return. It was, perhaps, the cruelest accident of all.